At 2:15 a.m. on October 28, the river ran like a dark mirror. Headlights cut the mist in a long, steady line, a convoy, 5 miles of steel and rubber, rolling slowly across a bridge toward the southern front. In the lead vehicle, a staff officer checked his watch, smiled at his men, and radioed the neat, practiced words every commander loves to hear: crossing initiated. On paper, their move looked unstoppable, protected by short-range air defenses, watched from above by radar, escorted by logistics teams that had become experts at moving supplies through war. They believed the bridge made them invincible. They were about to discover how fragile confidence can be when someone else writes the rules of the night. For weeks, Ukrainian eyes had been on that crossing, not because the bridge was valuable for its concrete, but because bridges are promises turned into motion promises that say fuel will arrive, shells will be loaded, and soldiers will have fire. Those promises move in time and pattern. Convoys follow rhythms, engines overheat, tires blow, radios go silent between checkpoints. Ukrainian analysts watched those rhythms and learned their language. They were patient. They did not rush. They waited for the moment. A long line of trucks would stop looking like a river and start looking like a target. When that moment arrived, the plan was set. So, what if a bridge could be turned into a kill zone? The first failure was ordinary. A tire overheated. A driver pulled to the shoulder. Small things become large problems when a convoy is in a narrow place. The formation tightened, distances collapsed, radios filled with routine calls that suddenly sounded panicked. Under the bridge, instruments that had blended into maintenance equipment woke up. They were not glamorous. They were not designed to make headlines. In less than 20 minutes, the bridge ceased to be a pathway. It became an altar of wreckage. For the soldiers stranded on the far bank, the arithmetic was immediate. Fuel, shells, and spare parts that had been counted as hours away now mattered in minutes. For the commanders who had planned negotiations and leverage around that supply line, the bargain evaporated in black smoke and flame. The strategic balance did not flip because of a single explosion. It shifted because an entire logistic logic was broken in an instant. But when supply lines collapse, what else follows? This is the modern truth of attrition warfare. Tanks and infantry move only as far as the pipes of fuel and the sacks of ammunition allow. Deny the pipes, and the front stops. Deny fuel, and jets and trucks thin out. Repair times lengthen. Morale drains away. Over the last month, Kyiv's long-range drone campaign has been stretching Russian logistics farther and deeper than in previous years. Small, stealthy systems, sometimes home-built, sometimes hybridized with commercial components, have reached into Russian rear areas, striking refineries, depots, and pipelines. Those strikes are not theater. They are a deliberate campaign to make supply unpredictable and expensive. On November 1, Ukrainian military intelligence announced a major blow, a strike on a ring pipeline near Moscow that, according to official statements, severely disrupted fuel flows to multiple refineries and to military logistics hubs. That hit was not an isolated stunt. It was part of a pressure campaign that multiplied the strategic effect of a demolished bridge. The Russian response was predictably loud and messy. Overnight, missile and drone salvos rained on Ukrainian cities, power stations, industrial centers, even hospitals. The intent was clear: punish, degrade, and force concessions. But punishment has its limits. The more Russia fires into Ukraine's infrastructure, the more it stretches its own supply chains, and the more vulnerable its rear becomes to asymmetric strikes. For Ukraine, the strategy is to create those bottlenecks where they hurt most. The human narratives thread through the technicalities. In a village near the river, a mother woke to the sound of distant explosions and the smell of smoke. She wrapped her children in blankets and watched convoys roll the other way, some empty, some burning. Soldiers on both sides wrote home about cold nights, about engines that wouldn't start, about the small cruelties of waiting for a supply truck that never came. War is a ledger of human moments.
More than 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers are surrounded. Russian forces have encircled troops near Kupiansk and Krasnoarmeysk in massive twin operations. President Volodymyr Zelensky has admitted that the situation looks grim, with Russia outnumbering Ukraine troops 8 against 1 in critical sectors. The news seems to be tightening around eastern Ukraine. Our next report with the latest from the battlefield.
The Eastern Front is collapsing under the weight of overwhelming force.
And logistical collapse writes some of the worst entries. For viewers, These are not abstractions. They are the reason food becomes scarce, hospitals lose power, and families decide whether to flee. The bridge's fall mattered because people do not fight in maps, they fight in lives. How do you win the war when every move costs more? Tactically, the operation that turned a crossing into a trap was multi-layered. It combined patient reconnaissance, electronic surveillance, and targeted fires. But above all, it used time as a weapon. Time lets small things become big problems. Time turns a stopped convoy into a cathedral of targets. And time gives defenders the chance to gather forces and strike precisely. In many ways, this is the story of modern conflict. Sensors see, networks connect, and small teams apply force where it multiplies the most. The recent months have shown this again and again. Ukrainian teams combining drones, artillery, and human intelligence to inflict outsized damage on Russian columns and rear depots. The bridge was one dramatic example among many operations, designed to do more with less. As dawn broke, the strategic reverberations spread. NATO and European capitals watched the fighting not just as a regional war, but as a test of supply, resilience, and political will. Ukraine, conversely, gained political capital from successes like the pipeline strike and the bridge ambush. These are cycles that can become self-reinforcing. Back on the ground, engineers and troops began the grim work of cleanup and assessment. Satellite imagery would later show the gouges in the river's edge and the charred hulks along the bank. Open-source researchers and independent analysts began to geolocate videos and piece together a timeline. Verification matters because the fog of war is full of exaggeration. Still, the pattern Ukrainian deep strikes, Russian punitive strikes, and logistic bottlenecks was verifiable across multiple reports in the last week. The bridge incident, whether counted as dozens or tens of destroyed vehicles, matched a broader set of confirmed strikes that together made a persuasive narrative. The war's center of gravity is moving into supply chains. What does this mean for the next 90 days? Expect three things. First, intensified protection for critical infrastructure, air defenses, hardening, and dispersed caches. Second, an accelerated campaign of long-range strikes by both sides, each trying to deny the other the ability to mass. Third, increased diplomatic pressure and volatility. As supplies dry up, political leaders face hard choices about escalation and concessions. In practice, that means more nights like this, sensor networks sweeping, small teams striking at the most vulnerable seams, and logistics planners working overtime to keep their armies moving. For Ukraine, sustaining this pressure requires continued support, money, munitions, and intelligence. For Russia, the choice is to trade space for supplies, or to push harder and risk even larger losses. Both roads are costly. There are moral and humanitarian layers to this calculus that deserve a final, quiet note. When supply lines are attacked, civilians pay a price. Pipelines and bridges are also arteries for food, fuel for ambulances, and materials for rebuilding. The environmental damage of a burning convoy on a river can poison waterways for months. Hospitals and schools close, and civilians are pressed into the role of refugees once more. Commanders may argue about strategic necessity. Families do not negotiate about clean water. Any credible recounting of tactical success must carry an account of harm. Win or lose, the war leaves people in its wake. What will history say about this night? In the archives of this campaign, the bridge will be a photograph, twisted metal, a black river, and a column of smoke that seemed to say the age of logistics had become the age of sensors. But history is not only photographs, it is choices. The choice to strike, the choice to risk civilian harm, the choice to keep fighting when the pipes run dry. These are the decisions that will be judged later. For now, commanders in Kyiv and Moscow count supplies, calculate risks, and talk about the next move. For viewers and for citizens, the lesson is urgent and simple. In modern war, knowledge and timing matter as much as tanks and missiles. The side that masters both will shape the map. Tonight, as satellite feeds continue to update and frontline channels post footage, one thing is clear. The battlefield is changing from fields to pipelines, from trenches to supply lines. What looked like an advantage for one side can, with patience and craft, become its undoing. And in that dark hour on the river, the crossing became a trap, and the trap became a turning point. If you want more frontline breakdowns like this, verified, sourced, and made for viewers who want the full picture, subscribe to Tactical Signals. Hit the bell, and we'll bring you the context behind the headlines, the tactics behind the maps, and the human stories the numbers don't tell. Keep watching, stay informed, and tell us what operational detail you want us to unpack next: drones, logistics, or long-range strike systems. Thank you for watching.